blah 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 blah, talking about teach, blah 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 blah, talking about the champ. Oh no way! Oh blah 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 blah, talking about the championship. Oh Shanks.
We always play against each other. Maybe let's give someone else a try. The sun sets too fast in Japan, but our need for information does not. So let's talk about the championship. The championship this week was a little bit similar to last week, where there was just a lot of Doflamingo, some teaches, some shanks, and whatnot. So today I thought I'd try to do something interesting, and I have a teach player with me.
Hi, that's me. I've been playing Teach since the start of the format, I guess. I just think it's very strong. It has a lot of strong matchups. It does suffer into Doflamingo, as you would imagine, but it's not that bad.
Yeah, so teach won.
It did. It did win.
Yeah, I didn't expect that, to be honest. I was expecting there to be more teach after how well it did last time.
Yeah.
Especially also, there was a little bit of a rumor, I guess, that teach does well in Doflamingo going here and there,
Yeah.
which is hard to believe. And
Yes.
I mean, obviously you said that you don't think it beats it. Nonetheless, teach won, and actually, teach is kind of, although he doesn't necessarily beat Doflamingo, he's in a weird spot where he beats a lot of the other decks.
Yeah.
That's probably why we haven't been seeing some other decks in the top 16. If you ignore Teach as a matchup, then decks such as Lucci, Blackyell, Luffy, Bonnie are all really good.
Yeah.
But probably exclusively because Teach exists, we haven't really seen them.
Obviously, we saw an Enel in the top 16, but I think Enel is one of those decks that really struggles against Teach. Even like Nami, if you saw on stream, the Nami came very close to winning against that Teach, but it usually shouldn't be that close, in my opinion, anyway. Teach is essentially a control deck, but it does it in a very unique way with something like Lucci, where instead of trying to KO absolutely everything that your opponent plays, it's preventing your opponent from playing the things in the first place. So I find it a bit more of a proactive kind of control deck in that sense. It's also kind of comparable to NL, where once you reach that late game of just dropping your 10 cost teachers, because it's a blocker, it kind of gives you an extra life. The early and mid game are kind of similar to Lucci in that you're controlling your opponent's board as you would. Teach particularly does well against decks that play one thing per turn. Obviously the leader effect prevents your opponent on play effects. It doesn't mean they can't use the characters, like they can still play it, it just won't have the effect. But particularly in matchups like Purple Luffy, where the 7-cost Luffy plays another character, stopping that whole other character from coming out is obviously crucial to the game plan, because then you only have to KO one 7-cost instead of a 7 and a 5, or like in Doflamingo, a 4 and a 4 with the Jinbei effect.
Why isn't the Doflamingo matchup winning then?
Obviously the leader effect requires you to trash a card every turn, which very greatly diminishes your resources.
Right.
And for Doflamingo, if you let that extra character come out even once, you just kind of lose on the spot. Teach has no dual KO effects like the 4-cost Lucci.
Right.
So you really are only KOing one thing at a time. And because you have to use leader effect every single turn to prevent these Jinbeis and these like bounce wars, and really have very little resources to work with. And you're essentially playing with 4 to 5 cards in hand for the whole game. So the Teach lists, they've, as you've probably seen from the last championship and this one, they've kind of got a bit more of a pattern to them now, whereas before they were kind of all over the place, to be honest. There was weird ideas of like 3-cost Brook and that kind of thing running around. But now the lists are kind of solidified into essentially 8 2Ks, 2 Vasco shot for sure, and a lot of people are generally including Jack. Honestly, the biggest point for me is I think 8 2Ks, you can definitely get away with 7. Because I found a lot of the time I'm discarding Shiryu, I'm discarding not so much Stronger, but definitely Shiryu.
I see.
I'm trashing because I need a Van Ogre, I need a Doc Q, I need a 10-cost Teach. And there's really not many times where you're defending life or characters with cards from hand. It's usually a blocker, or you're blocking the 10-cost Teach, or you're just taking the life. Not that that extra slot really gives you that much more of an advantage. For example, the winning list ran 2 Jack. I think 3 is probably more correct.
Just make sure you can actually get it.
Yeah, to make sure you can actually get it. Because 2 doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because you're kind of just being like, if I get it, I get it.
Yeah.
But at that point, why is it in the deck?
I mean, that's one way to think about it, I guess. But then why not run 4?
Yeah, so I tried running 4. And I found that despite not being searchable, it would just come into my hand at the wrong time. And I'd lose based off... Obviously, there's a lot of ways to filter your hand.
Yeah.
But when that second or third Jack comes into my hand, and I really need a Van Org or I really need a Doc Q,
Right.
then that's when it starts to get like, okay, do I really need 4 of these?
I see.
And the other aspect is a lot of your searches are only top 3, which means the more non-Blackbeard cards you put in, the more chance you have of missing a search,
I see.
which happened to me several times just by having like 2 Jacks and a Laboon. Missing a search in Teach is much more of an issue than missing a search in something like Shanks or like in Red Green Law, for example.
Yeah.
Just because you have so little resources, and missing that extra card usually means one less leader effect in the late game. Jack as a card, not needed, but it helps a lot with Doflamingo. And that's kind of the main reason why it's there. It has other applications, obviously, like in the mirror, you can use it to kind of KO Doc Qs, you can use it to KO mini searches or like with a cost reduction. Yeah, with like Van Augur, it hits a 6 cost. I think it's definitely mainly for Doflamingo. Another card that I was playing around with actually for quite a while was Nightmare Luffy or 5 cost Luffy, which I really, really like. Against decks like Shanks, or like Purple Luffy especially, want that extra attack for the pressure while removing a blocker or something else on the board. It's very helpful. Even in Doflamingo, actually, what you can do is you can actually cost reduce and attack with 5 cost Luffy into the rest of the character.
Yeah.
Obviously, it isn't guaranteed to remove it, but it does a lot. So it has applications, but I think Jack might just be a little bit better.
Basically, all the cards in the deck make sense. The one card that maybe people don't see that often in like decks in general is 2 cost blockers. Is that mainly just to pad out the search thing, or is there actual application to that specifically in Teach?
There is application to it, because there are a few times where you'll find towards the late stage of the game, you have maybe 1 10 cost Teach out, but only 1 life. Say you missed a clear earlier in the game, that 1 extra attack can really like mess you up. So having that 1 extra blocker that most decks can't deal with is very helpful in that scenario. And also against Doflamingo, sometimes like 9 Don or 7 Don, you'll play a Van Augur and you'll have 2 Don left over,
Right.
2 or 3 Don. And instead of just swing 7, you can play this 2 cost blocker, which has a lot more impact than just swinging 7.
I think probably last week there weren't as many Teach, which is why we saw lots of Lucci and lots of Black L Luffy.
Yeah.
Do I think? Although Doflamingo can do well into those matchups depending on their list and how they play, Teach is kind of the deck that, regardless of how they draw, will always just stump them because they can't use Moria. But the other deck that you would imagine you don't see that we saw last week and this week is Enel,
Yeah,
which is surprising.
very surprising.
The NL player ended up hitting a bunch of Doflamingos. Obviously, he ended up losing in the top 8 to Doflamingo, but he beat all the Doflamingos he hit up until that point. So I think that the deck that people are choosing, if they just want to hopefully only hit Doflamingo and try to win, is basically NL. I think that there's probably no other deck that's like consistently slightly winning or higher going first and second. Obviously, there's decks like Vegapunk or something, but no one wants to play Vegapunk. To be fair, the NL player did lose to Teach. He beat 1 Teach in the preliminary rounds. I don't know how.
Yeah, I don't really know either.
My first instinct was because the list is running 7 costs to NL.
Yeah.
That maybe they just have it stick to the board and it just rushes you down and hits you every single turn.
Yeah.
But Black Hole is stupid.
Black Hole is a card.
Black Hole is stupid, so
Yeah.
that doesn't work. It might just be that Teach just had a very bad game.
I think that's what it might have been.
Still, other decks have been popping up. The main one, of course, Doflamingo. There isn't too much to really talk about Doflamingo. Basically, the lists are the same now.
Yeah.
There is actually, not in this championship, but just something I want to talk about with Doflamingo, and that's the 7 cost Doflamingo from the ST03. A couple of people, Jackson and Jonas and whatnot, they have been messing around with how to get an edge in the mirror. And obviously, you get into a weird loop with Doflamingo. You're playing your 4 cost Slaw and your Jose every turn to bounce back their anything and Jose, basically, and then you just do that over and over again at each other, and the game never ends. And the way that you end up getting a lead in that situation is to find timings to play Jinbe, because that's an extra body, which means less things that they can bounce. So it's really just the number of Jimbes that you can get, and then making sure that you can get 1 Law, 1 Teach, and 1 Jose, and then you just use those for the rest of the game. It's a lot.
Miserable.
But Jose only bounces a 6 cost. Gravity Blade only bottoms a 6 cost. So 7 cost Doflamingo gets rid of Jose and also plays the body. And also, he's a warlord. So
He's a warlord.
I definitely think that just people forgot about the card. And I think if people remember that the card exists, then maybe people will play it also in Japan as well. Because ignoring the Teach matchup, it's just generally solid to have extra drills in a lot of matchups.
Yeah.
I think that if that starts to become popular, then people start putting in the 9-cost Mihawk.
Yeah, that's yeah.
So
And then you
just
get
keep
to-
going bigger. That could be the adaptation, because right now the lists have kind of stagnated for Doflamingo, at least in Japan.
Yeah.
Regarding this list, there is actually one interesting card, and that's Kaya. I think that the 1-cost Kaya in here makes a lot of sense, because generally the one problem that people have in Doflamingo is that you can't get cards out of your hand. So if you draw too many bricks, then you end up with too many counterless cards. So in that case, just being able to play a Kaya to refresh your hand could be nice. I do think, though, if you play Kaya, you might be able to lean a bit harder into the counterless, maybe even using this 7-cost Doflamingo, for example. I don't know, but that's the one interesting adaptation that this list had, and the other lists that I found from the top 16 were fairly standard.
So there's actually, although we talked about Teach a lot because there are 4 Teaches in the top cut, although 3 of them lost in the top 16 match, there were a lot of Shanks as well. There were 4 Shanks.
That surprised me.
Yeah. And I only found 1 Shanks list, but it's probably the craziest Shanks list I've ever
The
seen.
most insane looking thing ever.
It's really... Let's talk about Red Hawk. 2 cost plus 4,000 on counter, and then KO a 4,000 power or less.
Yeah.
But because obviously Shanks' leader effect will activate before you go into
Yeah.
the blocker phase, counter phase, then you can technically get rid of a 5,000 power or less.
Yeah.
Which means into decks such as Doflamingo, you can defend a 7,000 attack and also get rid of their Jinbe or something. Also can get rid of just like random things like the 4-cost Rebecca from Lucci. So the card has always been really good with the way that Shanks wants to play.
Yeah.
The main thing is that you never had a timing to leave 2 to left. But he runs 4, so he clearly has a timing. He also runs 6 10-costs.
Yeah.
He also runs 4 Radical Beam. I think most Shanks players just default to like Lucky Ru, Yaslope, 8-cost Rayleigh, 10-cost Shanks, and then just keep spamming Shanks until the opponent dies or you die.
Yeah.
But I think that if you try to do that with that sort of list, you really don't have a timing ever to use your stuff.
Yeah.
But he runs things such as the 5-cost Ace, first of all.
Mm.
He doesn't run the Searcher. 2-cost Sanji makes sense just because you stay at high life for so long.
Yeah.
But if you find a timing to play it, taking your life at some point, if you're still at like 4 or 5 past like 8 dong, doesn't hurt that much, and it's just an extra 7,000 attack. And I guess if you mix that in with things such as the 5-cost Rayleigh, which is helping you cycle through your deck, get rid of the events or 10 costs that you're choosing not to play, and then try to finish the game through that, then I guess you have timings to play them. But definitely you need to really know what you're doing.
At least from that list, the only kind of major timing I can see is 8-cost Rayleigh, brought up 2 for Red Hawk,
Yeah.
and then that obviously KOs a much larger.
Less popular now, but for a little while there was a popular list that didn't run any 10 costs and was running things like 7-cost Whitebeard, 8-cost Rayleigh, 8-cost Dragon, and kind of staying at that threshold. But they still weren't running Red Hawk, but still he's running both and also Red Hawk.
And Redbeard.
And also, he beat 3 Lucci.
Yeah, I guess it's just Dragon. Oh, and like that's the 5/7 Ace as well, right?
Well, I mean, 5/6, and it doesn't have
5/6.
Rush. Honestly, even though that card doesn't get Rush without your leader being Whitebeard Pirates,
Right.
I don't think that it's bad in other decks, just because it still can be hit to be KO'd. So usually you play like 5/6, you hit, and then if the opponent hits it with like anything that's like 8,000 power or higher, it just disappears.
Yeah.
But then if you just play it active, it's because it can't be removed. So
Yeah.
no matter what it will get the attack of, it's just on that turn or the next turn. So you play the 5-cost Ace, you play Dragon, you rest them at the same time, and then it gets a bit tricky for the opponent. Lucci doesn't run that many 2Ks. Hitting at 6K over and over, like 3 turns in a row, starts to hurt for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, I can see that then. I need to try that list then. It kind of sounds fun. Because when they showed the leader, I saw that leader and I saw Red Hawk, and I was like, oh, this is going to be crazy. and then they showed 10-cost Shanks, and then I was like, it's a one or the other. And 10-cost Shanks is so good. I mean, if he made it work, he made it to top 16. What did he end up losing to? He lost 2 out of 3 mirrors that he hit.
Yeah.
But all 3 mirrors, he said he went first. Obviously, in the Shanks mirror, you want to be going second.
Yeah.
Maybe it's slightly different if you have 5-cost Ace, just because they can't get rid of that with Kiru, which is something for the mirror. But still, unfortunately, he did end up losing 2 mirrors. So maybe it's not enough to flip it, but it might help when going first. He did end up winning 1 matchup when going first. But generally, like, although the Rush Shanks thing is a thing that people have experimented with, it has tended to be weak in the mirror, which is why people kind of strayed away from it. That list is kind of a mix of the two, where it runs things like the Rayleigh. It doesn't run 7-cost Whitebeard, but it runs Dragon.
Yeah.
It runs the 5-cost Ace.
Yeah, I think the other thing that could kind of be a part of the reason is there's no searches in that deck. I think consistency is definitely a factor there.
But I was considering that a little bit back. I wasn't trying something that crazy. The only really good cards that Shanks has are Lucky Roo and 10-cost Shanks.
Yeah.
Oh, and Beckman. But the thing is that, like, if you run Beckman and 7-cost Whitebeard, for example, you have so many of them that you'll probably draw into at least one of them. Basically, it's just Lucky Roo and 10-cost Shanks. But because those cards were so strong, we ended up running the Searcher anyways. But the other cards that you're forced to put in because of that, it's weird because Yathlop's effect is really strong. Like, it sounds really good on paper to make your leader 6k, but just it comes out so early where your leader doesn't need to be 6k at that point, especially because you also have your leader effect. And then in the late game, making your leader plus 1000 at that point's a bit too late.
Yeah.
So it's very awkward. Obviously, Yathlop is a good card, just not necessarily a great card or like required card in Shanks. So he just puts in all of the good cards and throws in a million events, so he just never dies. The last list,
Nami.
yeah. Can I see the list?
Rush is up.
Yeah, that actually. Actually, I want to talk about that. 4-cost Rush Usopp, which, if you remember, I think back in what 03, people were putting in one of. It's a very interesting card, and it catches so many people off guard. If they play it and it doesn't get the effect off, kind of use a lot of Don. It does force the opponent to have that counter that you're playing against a Nami, you're not expecting to be hit, so kind of discarding all that counter. In the championship, in the game against Teach, this card came out. I think it really made the matchup a lot closer than it needed to be. He had been discarding 2Ks all game.
Nami never hits, so you don't need cards.
Exactly,
basically.
right? Yeah, so he's just been discarding to fuel his purchase, to discard for the stage, just digging for more whatever. He had just enough to get to the threshold and have one card remaining. I think that saved him the game, but if that Nami hit, he definitely would have lost that.
Way back when, there's also like a Nami list where it was the leader Nami, but the deck was Iwangofu.
I remember that.
Yeah, so like you just play Nami and you hit and pretend that you're like a beginner. And then they take all the 5k hits because it's free cards, and you're like, oh dude, this is so free. And then you slam down the 7-cost Iwangofu and then 6-cost Luffy, and then you're like, oh,
You're like shit.
Yeah, it only works like once basically. I got by that once. I think it's that sort of thing where you have a way that you're trying to play against a certain deck, and then if they do something differently, then it kind of messes with what your plan was. So it messes up your mulligan, it messes up how you've been playing out the game. So just having those sorts of like random cards that can throw the game in a different direction can be very good. Still, top 4 Nami list. Almost beat Teach, which is very hard matchup. The one issue with Nami though is that she loses to Teach.
Yes.
If that wasn't there, I can totally see Nami. But Teach kind of has that role as the deck that loses to Doflamingo but beats the other decks.
Yeah.
That Nami used to have.
For sure. I think Teach is definitely kind of a gatekeeper deck. At least right now anyway. I think if Teach wasn't a thing, Lucci would be significantly more prominent.
I mean,
even with Black Yellow Luffy, I think there are ways around it.
We see a lot of Lucci overseas in OP0 8.5 because they don't have Teach or Shanks yet. Shanks doesn't necessarily do well into them, but Shanks beats Black Yellow Luffy. I think just those two decks, although those are basically the only two decks from OP09 that have really come into the meta, they do change a lot of things.
Hey guys, sorry, this was about the Hokkaido Championship, which at the time of editing this was almost about a week and a half ago, which means that the next championship has already come out, where we actually saw decks like Foxy, and that's very interesting, and I want to cover that very soon, but I've been a bit busy, of course. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this. I'll be putting out the next championship video relatively soon. I have another interesting spin that I'm trying to put on that to try to keep things interesting for you guys. If you guys enjoyed this, please consider subscribing, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.